Hey there and welcome back to another My Hero Academia video. And a couple of months ago now, I made a video discussing the long-running speculation as to who the Traitor of UA was, running through all the possible candidates in Class 1A and beyond, and even discussing whether the plotline had been dropped altogether. And at the time, I came to the conclusion it was either probably Hagakure, after all she's minor enough that the twist wouldn't seem forced, because we haven't seen too much characterization for her, and that she has a quirk that's tailor-made for being a spy. The other possible alternative I came up with was that the storyline was just a red herring that was going to be dropped, as it kind of stopped being relevant after the forest training arc as we moved into different storylines and Shigaraki had to start operating on his own. Now obviously, before we actually talk about the reveal, manga spoilers incoming, so careful if you aren't completely up to date just yet. Now in one of the more recent chapters that's been released for My Hero Academia, we saw All For One talking smack to Darby about how Darby's too singularly focused in his pursuit to take down Endeavor, that he's just going to doggedly follow his one path to its conclusion. But All For One plants seeds years or even decades in advance, laying down different routes that he may one day use to achieve his end objective, and forging alliances with various different people. And this leads us to the Traitor reveal, as he tells Darby that despite Shigaraki not being the perfect vessel yet, and Deku escaping from his grasp for the time being, he's still able to move forward with his plans because unlike Darby, he has friends to spare. And first up, sick burn on Darby, excuse the pun, and second, we got the Traitor reveal, because in the very next panel, it shows Hagakure's silhouette, which seemed to confirm that she was the traitor. And for a few short moments, I felt so vindicated, until the next chapter pulled a traitor bait and switch, revealing that it was in fact Aoyama the whole time and she was just looking at him. And I won't lie, for a hot minute I was a bit frustrated with that. I thought, really, this guy? And I kind of felt, I don't know, not underwhelmed, but maybe just a little bit whelmed. Because look, the Traitor storyline was cool, but it lost all relevance by this point in the story. And I know there are story reasons as to why it didn't matter for the time being, but honestly, it just feels a little bit late. By this point in the story, it almost doesn't matter. We've moved on to bigger and more important things. And now we loop back around to a story thread that I feel like should have been resolved a long time ago. Or at the very least should have had more seeds that there was a traitor around throughout the heavier arcs of the story. It would have been more interesting this way, heating up the possibility of a reveal at any turn and that the heroes are constantly put in more and more danger without knowing who to trust. It kind of lost its edge with little to no mention of it until we hurtled ever closer to the story's grand finale. And it kind of feels like we're going to be wasting chapters on a story that really doesn't have much relevance anymore, especially as he gets caught literally straight away after the reveal. Nice. I mean, yes, in hindsight there are more clues than you'd expect, even after the supposed traitor has been disregarded by the principal, but it still feels like a bit of an irrelevant story thread at this point in time. And even beyond that, I was a bit disappointed in the traitor's actual identity, because after the Hagakure cliffhanger, I really did feel a sense of vindication. It just felt like all the signs pointed to her. After all, her character arc and storyline has been pretty much invisible, and so I thought that finally they were going to do something interesting with her. Turns out I was wrong, and I was briefly bummed out. It just felt like it would have made a lot of sense. But then I thought about it a little bit more. Why should I care about her? She has no real relationship with Deku. Have they even really spoken before at all? She doesn't really matter, and the impact would be a lot less than if it was Aoyama. And why? Because Aoyama's gotten developed. He's got a bit of a storyline and interaction with the other important characters. He's been given time to shine. Maybe not as much as the big characters, but enough to make you somewhat care about him. And importantly, Deku cares about him. They're friends. Maybe not on the level of Uraraka or Bakugo or Todoroki in terms of his importance, but they're still close, and the story goes out of its way to show them bonding over their shared similarities, despite their obvious differences. But despite this closeness, he's still relatively minor. We don't get inside his head. He hasn't been fleshed out. We don't see his internal monologue often, or much of his background, just snippets. And so whilst it is a shock, and you get the character's sense of betrayal, it still feels realistic. It doesn't feel like a stretch in the writing. And I think one of the best parts of this reveal is that they just come out and give us a proper motive for him to be doing this. All For One gave him his quirk, and now his parents owe him big time. And thus, he has to do what he says, or his parents will be killed. No beating around the bush, no speculation, no wasted time. They just come out and tell us how it is, which is quite refreshing. The storyline was there, and then disappeared for ages, so I guess it's best not to drag out the reasons why. And really, when you look at it, all the clues are there. Aoyama's never shown during the USJ incident, and he actually brings attention to this afterwards, talking about how nobody knows where he was and he's not going to tell them. And since he's so obnoxious about it, it throws you off the scent and leaves other characters like Hagakure as a red herring for you to suspect. You couldn't imagine that the actual traitor would try to stand out so much and try to get as much attention as they can. And in that way, it's actually really clever the way you get thrown off the scent. And then you see it again in the forest training arc. It looks like Aoyama isn't acting to help fight the villains out of fear for himself. But whilst that's there, it's also deeper than that. The fear that his parents will be killed by All For One if he finds out that he's betrayed him. And so he hides and he does a lone sneak attack. And then after that, he actively encourages his class not to try and rescue Bakugo from All For One. And then he and his mother watch on in shock as All Might takes him down. And with the added knowledge that he's the mole, it makes these scenes all the more interesting. It makes his attempt at preventing the others going after All For One seem like, despite everything, he actually does care about his classmates. He knows how dangerous this guy is. He doesn't want them to die. It shows that he isn't some heartless, monstrous traitor. And the scene where he watches All Might win shows that he never really thought All For One could lose. He'd lost hope. He didn't think it would ever happen. So he felt like he didn't have a choice. And the reveal even adds even more depth to his actions after the storyline had sort of faded away. In the provisional license exam, there's a moment where he tries to sacrifice himself so that his classmates can pass the exam instead of him. And at the time, it feels like it's just because he had self-doubts. But with this, we can see that he feels guilt. He wants his friends to become heroes and live their dreams, but he feels like he doesn't deserve to, because he kept putting them at risk, because he was helping the worst villain the world has ever seen. And then he befriended Deku, the cheese. I know everything. Knowing that Deku wasn't built for his quirk, just like he wasn't, because he'd probably been told at that point about who Deku is and what his quirk is, or at least have the basic knowledge that he needs to know. And whilst you could view this as him getting close to him for spying purposes just in case, I think it's more likely that he sees another person who is quirkless like him, a person who was different and yet was given a quirk so they could follow their dreams, a person whose body was also rejecting their quirk, but who was pushing to overcome that obstacle. So, from that perspective, it's actually quite sweet. And I think it makes Aoyama's betrayal feel all the more tragic. And honestly, I'm quite surprised. I came into this reveal, and this video, kind of on the fence. The storyline had been on the back burner for so long that it didn't feel relevant. But now with that reveal, it kind of flipped that belief on its head the more I thought about it. Because now we have this close friendship with Deku, and a whole deeper understanding of Aoyama's actions throughout the story's run so far. Even though it hasn't added any new scenes yet, it just enhances everything about his story so far. And it makes me excited to see how the plot will unfold, despite my initial apprehension. That being said though, those are just my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of the traitor reveal? Think the right choice was made, or do you think it would have been better to be somebody else? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to leave a comment and let me know.